Welcome everybody to Zolder, with the cars due to come out in just a few minutes' time, ready for our second free practice session. And the sun is now out, as it started to do at the end of the first free practice session. It was a fairly overcast start to the day for this morning's session. There'd been a little bit of early rain. The track had dried out by the time the cars went on track, but there was a little shower only for a few minutes around about halfway through the session, and then that quickly disappeared, and it was replaced by some blue skies, some clouds and some sunshine. But it's much brighter now. It's a little bit warmer than it was a couple of hours ago too. It's just under 21 degrees the air temperature, and the track temperature's gone up by around about 3 degrees, so 26 degrees now. That session was also, if you weren't watching it this morning, interrupted by a couple of red flags. One when Timo Glock went off the road and his BMW got stuck in the gravel trap, and towards the end of the session, with just 6 minutes to go, Max Book had a similar issue at turn 4 and went off into the gravel trap backwards in his Mercedes. By the time they got the car out of the gravel trap, there wasn't time to restart, so the final 6 minutes or so of the session were lost. So it's a little bit of a difficult session with that rain, and with the 2 red flags in the second half of the 45 minutes, cars didn't really get the chance to put any long runs in. Esteban Moot, I think, was just about the only driver that managed a sort of semi-long run on his tyres of 7 laps, but most of them were only able to get maybe 4 or 5 laps in any one stint. So the concentration was very much in that first free practice session on single lap pace, setting the cars up for qualifying. I think there'll probably be a little bit of that in this session, perhaps early on, but then, and perhaps at the end as well. But most of the session, I think, will be dedicated to getting the cars set up in race trim and to get used to the conditions as well, which, as I say, are now much warmer. I'm Chris Hartley. I'm going to talk you through the practice session and both qualifying sessions and both races coming up here at Zolder this weekend. The third weekend of the 2021 DTM season, with 20 cars now lining up for this session. And joining the grid for this weekend, he's going to do 3 outings in DTM this year, is the Austrian driver, the ex-Grand Prix racer, Christian Klein, who brings a 6 different manufacturer onto the grid with his McLaren 720S, run by the JP Motorsport team. So a very warm welcome to Christian on the grid. There are marshals without whom we couldn't do any of this, so massive thanks to the marshals out there on post looking after the safety of the drivers, and huge condolences to the family and friends of the marshal that sadly lost his life in a tragic accident at Brands Hatch last weekend. Lots of love and support for marshals around the world from drivers and race fans alike. So we're forever indebted to the service that they provide. And there you can see that this is a pretty narrow circuit at Zolder. It's an old school track built in the 1960s, actually designed by a Dutchman who was the same designer that built the famous Suzuka circuit in Japan. It's just over 4 kilometers long. It's pretty undulating. It's got some fast sections, but some tight chicanes as well. So drivers in the cars ready to be released, and there our first glimpse in this session of Christian Klein, the 38-year-old. Did a pretty good job in the first free practice session, did Christian.
Clear. 1 minute until session starts. 1 minute.
Team radio checks. 1 minute to go, and he managed 17th place, but his time was a 1 minute 29.905, 1.7 seconds away from the very best time of the session, but he was only half a second or so away from being in the top 10. So Max Gotts was the driver that set the best time in free practice 1 in the Team HRT Mercedes, 1 minute 28.170 seconds. He had a couple of really quick laps. That one put him just over half a second quicker than anybody, which in DTM terms, around a relatively short circuit, certainly not the longest circuit on the calendar. Now, that was a big gap for him. Alex Albon was a driver that improved late on. The Thai driver with the AlphaTauri AF Corsa Ferrari did a 128.675, half a second adrift. And the championship leader, Kelvin van der Linde, in the Team Abt Sportsline Audi, went really quickly as well, 128.754 seconds. So he was only 79 thousandths of a second behind Albon. and he was only 34 thousandths of a second quicker than his closest championship rival, Liam Lawson, the 19-year-old from Hastings in New Zealand, also in the AF Corsa run, Red Bull backed Ferrari. Fourth quickest, 128.788 seconds, and in turn, he was only 14 thousandths of a second quicker than Vincent Abril, the Monegasque driver in the HRT Mercedes. And then finally, to say that that was a very small gap from 5th to 6th as well, with Nico Muller 6th in the end, and only 44 thousandths of a second away from Abril's time. So although Max Scott's had a big gap of half a second, the next 5 drivers were all separated by less than 0.2 of a second, so very closely matched indeed. We had Esteban Munt with his new livery for the weekend, which I'm sure we'll see during the course of the coverage. In 7th place is the only Belgian driver on the grid this weekend, and Mike Rockenfeller, Philip Ellis and Lucas Auer were all in the top 10 as well. You're right on board with Philip Ellis, one of the 4 different race winners that we've had so far in the 2021 DTM season. First and a 4th at the last weekend at Lausitzring in the east of Germany, putting him up to 3rd place in the standings on 48 points behind Liam Lawson, who's 2nd on 65. And only 4 in front of him, the championship leader, Calvin van der Linde, had some bad luck not to get a race win potentially at Lausitzring when his car briefly ground to a halt, shut down. He had to reboot it, lost the lead of the race, dropped to 3rd. Had a terrific battle for a few laps with Liam Lawson to try and get back into 2nd, but Liam kept him at bay. And at the head of the pack, Max Scott went on to get his first race victory in his 3rd season of DTM. So that's the drivers' table. In terms of the Brands Championship, Mercedes lead that one. They've got 147 points. Audi have got 120. And 3rd are Ferrari on 96. In the Teams Championship, it's Red Bull, AlphaTauri, AF Corsa, 96 points, just 1 point ahead of Team AB Sportsline, with Mercedes AMG Team Winwood 3rd now on 75 points. Top 10 all scored points in the races. FIA Championship point system, 25 for a win, 18 for 2nd, 15 for 3rd, down to a point for 10th, and points in qualifying as well, 3 points for getting pole position, 2 points for qualifying 2nd, and a point for qualifying 3rd. Coming out of the pits is Max Gotzen, experienced GT racer, as well as his 3rd season of the DTM. After a couple of years away, he comes back.
Position was very good.
Series champion Max Scott's out onto the track, and Esteban Munt
like
going out
5 centimeters,
as well.
Too much to the front or something like that in this range, but quite good. Huh?
So you're right on board now then with the Belgian driver, 2nd youngest driver on the grid at just 19 years of age, comes from Brussels, the circuit here at Zolder, based in central Belgium in a former industrial area, fairly quiet part of the country. And having spent last season competing in selected races in the GT4 European Series, and prior to that with single-seater experience predominantly in things like the Toyota Racing Series, a bit of Japanese F3 and French F4, in which he had a good season in 2018. Esteban Munt coming into DTM for the first time. We get to see the exterior of his car. If you've been following DTM so far this year, you'll notice the livery very different. He unveiled it this morning. The French artist Delphine de Saxe-Coburge, who is Belgian, has presented this new livery on the car, an art livery. It's based on one of her works, which is called Never Give Up. Esteban's a fan, and like the fact that it's tied in with his own view on life, and they've got together to produce this really different-looking art liveried car. Not the first time artists have been involved in putting liveries on race cars. We've had pop artists like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein in the past have put art liveries onto cars, but it certainly stands out, that's for sure. The artist Delphine de Saxe-Coburge, also a member of the royal family. She's a princess, actually. She's the a daughter of King Albert II here in Belgium. So we'll get to see that car. It's gone back into the pits for now, though, and we can see Daniel Huncadeo didn't really get a flying lap in that first free practice session. And he did a couple of exploratory laps, so he'll be, I think, keen to get out and do as much running as he can here. Daniel Huncadeo with the Gruppa M Racing team, and This will only be his second ever weekend racing at Zolder. Lots of them haven't raced here before, including most of the rookies. Not all of the rookies. Esme Hawkey, who races in the Lamborghini, has been here a couple of years ago when the W Series, the International Single-Seater Series for all female racers, raced as part of the DTM package. She raced here at Zolder, so said she likes the circuit. Obviously, a very different prospect in this type of car than it was in the single-seater. But at least she's got some familiarity with the track. But lots of the rookies haven't, at least not in a race weekend. So Alex Albon has set the first real time of the session and is immediately beaten by this man, Sheldon van der Linde. So Alex Albon, 1:28.972, set the initial quickest time of the session. And a 1:28.774 now for Sheldon, pips that by almost 0.2 of a second. Liam Lawson's also gone quite quickly to start with, not an absolute screamer, but 1:29.032 to go third quickest. And we're watching Arjun Miney now on his lap. He's currently in 5th place. He's done a 1:30.3 so far, but this should be quicker. And Daniel Huncadeo has gone absolute best in the first sector, so 28.304 seconds. That's 2 or 3/10 of a second up on the best first sector time that we've seen so far. So Daniel Huncadeo in the number 8 machine going well. Nico Muller for the time being goes to the top of the times though by a fraction, by 0.004 of a second with a 1:28.770. Huncadeo, I think he's going to beat it when he comes through. Arjun Miney with a pretty good lap to go into 6th place. And Huncadeo about to shoot up the order, a personal best in the second sector as well. So the Grupper M Mercedes, which has done much running so far, comes out of the last corner, goes over the crest, slight downhill run over the finish line, and the time went off in the end. He backed off or had a problem perhaps in that last sector because it was looking like a really good lap, but he lost out in the very last part of the lap, so didn't improve overall. We have had, though, an improvement for Esme Hawkey, who's for the first time into the 1:29s in her T3 Motorsport Lamborghini, 1:29.620 for Esme. Did a great job to get back in the car for race 2 at Lausitzring after a pretty hefty accident through that tri-oval banking that was used for the first time in DTM, part of the old IndyCar circuit, and back the car on the bumps of the track, snapping away from her at high speed, about 200 kilometers an hour. Max Gott's on a pretty good lap. Maximilian Buch with a good lap as well. And so that puts him into 3rd place, 1:28.932. So you got 1:28.5 now for Nico Muller. So he puts in the absolute best second sector time and personal best in sector 1. Sheldon van der Linde has gone second with a 1:28.774. Marco Wittmann, 3rd. Now that's encouraging for the BMW, 2nd and 3rd. 1:28.7 for van der Linde, 1:28.8 for Wittmann. They were not that quick in the first free practice session at the BMWs, but that looks much, much more encouraging. Timo Glock's going quite well, as one in 9th position in the 3rd of the BMWs. Had an absolute best in sectors 1 and 2 for Huncadeo now, though, so we saw that potentially he was going to be on for a quick lap last time around, and there he goes through and goes to the top of the times with a 1:28.112. So that, by 0.4 of a second, is the quickest lap of the session. It's also the quickest lap of the day because it beats the Max Gott's time from free practice 1, which was 1:28.170. So, as suspected, they're going in this first part of free practice for single lap pace, qualifying type runs. Later on, I think they'll be going for the longer runs as well to understand the cars and the tyres and how that works out over a longer run, as Mike Rockenfeller goes second now in the Audi, 1:28.387. There is Rocky in the Abt Sportsline car, new team for Mike, who spent so much of his DTM career with the Phoenix Racing Squad, which is based in just outside the Nürburgring, but now an Abt Sportsline racer. It's Jürgen Abt's team, and Nico Muller splits the two of them. He goes second and just misses out on the top spot with a 1:28.147. You're riding on board with the Swiss driver now as he continues on to another lap, which might be a quick one as well. So fastest, Huncadeo, 2nd Muller, 3rd Rockenfeller. This is Liam Lawson's viewpoint in the Ferrari, as Liam getting on this lap. Personal best in the first 2 sectors. Flings it through the final chicane at Jackie X box. Down the gears a bit, but goes through, and it is a 1:28.824 So that's 6th place now for him. Hunkedaer fastest, Muller 2nd, Rockenfeller 3rd, van der Linde 4th, Max Spook in 5th, and Liam Lawson rounding out the top 6. So we've got 9/10 of a second covering the top 11. This is a much tighter field, more compact field than we had earlier, but rain is starting to come down almost from nowhere. So there's obviously a rain cloud up there in amongst the blue skies. And that is why Liam is now going to be backing off on these slick tyres with all that horsepower. You've got to be very, very careful out there. Here's Nico Muller having set the 2nd fastest lap of the session. So it looks fairly dry over on this side of the circuit, but he's obviously got news that the rain is coming. And part of the circuit starting to get a little bit wet, and through into the pit lane he comes as Marco Wittmann stays out on track, completely dry over the start-finish line. Wittmann goes through. He did a personal best in the 2nd sector, and it's a good lap from Marco as well, the former double champion from southern Germany with a 1:28.756. So different areas of the circuit looking very different in terms of the weather conditions. Looks more rainy over here towards the end of the 1st section. That's where the windscreen wipers now come on. Hunkedaer and Muller, who are the top 2, have both come into the pits. Rockenfeller and Wittmann, who are 3rd and 4th, are still on track, but they're not going to improve now. And Sheldon van der Linde into the pits as well in 5th place. And there you can see all that rain on the windscreen and of the Ferrari. Very off-putting indeed. So let's hope it's a passing shower, but it could be one of those weekends with the weather. It's an engineer's nightmare, this, because you want to set the car up for the ideal conditions, but you don't quite know what it's going to do. Do you set it up for dry, wet, or damp? And if it keeps changing like this during the course of the race weekend, that's going to be tricky, because you have to pick the setup long before you get the cars onto the grid or into the session. So there'll be a lot of people looking at weather apps. Slick Michelin's going back onto Sophia Florsch's car, one of the team Abt Sportsline machines. Team principal Thomas Biermeier will be there overseeing proceedings. Abt have done, just while we've got time to mention it, Abt have done one of the teams in DTM that have been fundraising for the recent terrible floods that happened in the Eifel region in Germany, in and around the Nürburgring circuit. Lots of people losing their homes, too many people losing their lives and livelihoods as well. Terrible flooding, that a month's worth of rain in just a couple of days. And the fundraising tag of Via for the Eifel has been supported by Team Abt. As we hear from Marco Wittmann, who'll be heading back for the pits as well, surely, but he set that really good lap time of 4th place in 1:28.7 before he came in. But going back to Team Abt, yes, they put up an auction, basically, for a member of the public to join the team and come onto the pit wall, be part of the nerve centre for the team. And the highest bid was €6,000.
We'll send you out for a single lap, and you judge if you want to stay out for a couple of laps for a small run. If not, we'll just park it.
Okay. I mean, at the moment there are consistently showers or drizzle, so we could have a couple of laps on the wet with not super high pressure, to be honest, and give it a try more or less.
Copy that. Pressures are low.
So their insight into the conditions from Marco Wittmann over the team radio. So his engineer coming to him and saying, like, come in, we'll put the wet tyres on, we'll go for a couple of laps. If you don't feel it's worth it, it's not really working, it's not wet enough, we'll come back in. But Marco saying, actually, was the only driver out there now. In fact, there's 2 drivers out there. I think Max Spooky's out there also, saying, actually, it's pretty consistent. It's showering everywhere. So I think it is worth putting the wet tyres on. Keep the pressures low, though, because it's not that much surface water. It's not really any surface water. So you don't want the tyres to get too hot. So they're going to keep the pressures down, but it will go out there. And it's looking damp for now. Well, there's certain parts of the course where I don't think it's really raining at the moment. Just showers here and there. So Wittmann brings the car in, having set that 1:28.756. So Mercedes top, Daniel Hunkedaer, 2 Audis next, Muller and Rockenfeller. Muller will be really pleased about this because he had such a tough weekend, as did Team Rosberg, really, both he and his teammate, the American Dev Gore, just couldn't get the car really working, just had imbalance issues all the way around the Lausitz ring, which they couldn't really understand. And it got a bit better. They tried some radical setups, but it never really improved, and he only just scraped into the points in the second race in the end. But he was pretty buoyed by how the car performed here a month or so ago in testing. So Muller will be coming into this, no doubt about it, wanting to win the championship this year, having been the runner-up for the last 2 years running. He'll be very pleased to see that the car seems to be working well in the conditions so far in free practice. Arjun Mainy's going to be the first to attack the damp circuit then. Arjun, who was 14th quickest in the first session. Somebody else that's new to the Zolder circuit and new to DTM. This is only his third race weekend. Only 23 years of age, from Bengaluru in India, and some Formula One experience as well. Previously a development driver for the Haas F1 team back in 2017 and 2018, racing in the Asian Le Mans series for the last couple of seasons, European Le Mans before that. But he started out in single-seaters, Arjun Mainy, and first made a name for himself really in the British Formula 4 Championship, the BRDC, British Racing Drivers Club Formula 4 Championship, as it was then back in 2014. Arjun was the runner-up in that championship, racing in the UK, and he was only beaten by 3 points in the end in the championship title by some bloke called George Russell. I think he's done quite well for himself since then. So Arjun, a very talented young single-seater racer, never quite got the break, and perhaps the top flight car that he would have liked, but he's redefined himself now as a GT and now touring car racer, and as I say, lots of speed he showed at the Lausitz ring. So points coming for Arjun, it's just a matter of when, I think. Back on board with Christian Klein then, the ex-Grand Prix racer, who was 17th this morning, looking to improve his dry running pace, but getting a bit of a feel for the car in damp conditions now. 129.6 was his best lap time before the rain came down in this session, which was 0.3 of a second quicker than he managed in free practice one. And Daniel Hunkedeer's got off the road in these slippery conditions. That's the third car that we've seen off across the 2 free practice sessions, and doesn't look like the man from Barcelona is going to be moving anywhere rapidly. So it could potentially be another stoppage, this. But for now, green flag's out, and I think this is probably going to be understeering and then oversteering to correct the slide. Yep, onto the curbs. Very wet on the curbs there. Coming out of turn 2, that looks like. Just lost the back end of the car and did go into the barrier backwards. Fairly square on, but there'll be some damage, particularly to the left rear corner of that Grupper M run machine. And sure enough, the red flags come out, so the session is going to be stopped. Third stoppage that we've had then across the 2 practice sessions. The clock will continue to tick. If it was a qualifying session, the clock would stop, but it will continue to count down. I did get this slightly longer second session than they previously had in the DTM. Go back to the last couple of years, you'd get 45 minutes for free practice 1 and a 30-minute session for free practice 2, but that got extended this year, so they were both 45 minutes long. Marshalling team very efficient here at Zolder, so judging by the first 2 red flag periods we saw, it's not going to be long before they get that car moved out of the gravel. He might even be able to, once he's out of the gravel, drive the car himself back to the pits. So everybody heads back in. Nobody really had the chance to put a lap time in on those damp conditions to see what it was like. Just started to get a feel for it, and it's been that kind of day really with these stoppages. I suppose part of that is the nature of the circuit here at Zolder, really, because you make a mistake and go off the road at other tracks and you can get away with it. You can go onto tarmac runoff area. But here, that's not the case. And, yeah, that very, very wet curb quickly caught him out. You see, it's a fairly narrow circuit, and before you have time to react, you're off on the grass, which, of course, is a little bit damp as well. So it's going to be towed out. It's not a very deep gravel. Trap's good enough to slow the cars down, but they're able to pull the car out easily enough. They've already swept up any gravel that might have been there. And because he's not driven back onto the circuit, I don't think he'll dump a load of gravel onto the track. Just checking the back end of the car is still fixed on. Need a bit of work, but I'm fairly confident they'll be able to get the car back out there and back on track for Daniel. Andy Smith, the team manager for Grupper M, is one of the many international team managers, race engineers, race mechanics that get involved in DTM, which is very much an international series, of course. Daniel gets back underway under his own steam, based out in Hong Kong, Andy. So I know he's at the first couple of rounds, met up with him at the first round at Monza, but he's not able to get to every round. Huge experience and success for the Grupper M team in international GT racing. Founded about 20 years ago now, in the early 2000s, and FIA GT2 champions back in 2005 with Mark Lieb, and Mike Rockenfeller, 2013 DTM champion. Manuel Collard, Tim Sugden finished second for the team. They were running Porsches. They were linked with Porsche for a long time in the team, and won 11 out of the 11 races between their drivers that season in 2005. GT3 World Champions as recently as 2019 as well at Macau with Raffaele Marciello, who's backed as a Ferrari protege at one point. Never quite made it into Formula One. It's become a pretty successful GT racer though. So cars pushed back into garages. You can see the rear camera there, which the drivers are able to use during the races to see where and when they're about to be attacked by other drivers behind. So all quiet for now out on track, but it's properly raining now. You'd believe that, would you, at the start of the session with those blue skies? But it's incredibly changeable here. So it is a chance for them to get some wet running in now, because that could be key during the course of the weekend. Apologies, just a brief technical glitch in the studio, but just lost audio for a few seconds. But you haven't missed anything, because all we've got is Daniel Hunkedair driving back to the pits because the rain has started to lash down. The reason the red flags came out was because Daniel went into the gravel trap. But yeah, properly wet now, all of a sudden. Totally different conditions than we had 20-odd minutes ago. And that means a useful exercise potentially for the drivers and the teams to get the wet tyres on. Check out the setup in terms of suspension, tyre pressures and so forth for wet conditions, because that might be a feature at some point during the course of the next 2 days here at Zolder, given how changeable the weather has been so far. And we go green again, so cars are allowed to go back onto the circuit. It's 22 minutes and 10 seconds left on the clock, and sure enough, here they all come, and Nico Muller is keen to get out. That's on Abril getting out in his HRT Mercedes as well. And they'll check at Grupper M the back end of the car here, which just went into the barrier. Not super heavy, but there will be at least some superficial damage to the left rear corner of that Mercedes. But I think they'll probably just give it a check in the garage. Obviously got to change the tyres anyway, but hopefully they'll be able to get Danny back out onto the track. So almost certainly Daniel's going to end up with the best time of the day, because very, very unlikely it's going to dry out now. So 128.112. So now we turn our attentions to what the wet weather times might be like, and you see just how much spray is out there already. It was very gentle to start with the rain, but it suddenly started to throw it down once the red flags appeared. So a lot of surface water. You know, the curbs are very slippy here as well, from what we saw from Daniel Hunkedair's spin. And you ride on board now with Nico Muller. And even though he's a long way back from the car ahead, it gives you just an impression of how much the spray can affect your visibility around the circuit. So riding on board with Nico now, just coming out through turn 11 here, about 130 kilometers an hour at the moment, up to 140. Back down the gears, slowing it down for turn 12 through this jinking section next at 13 and 14, and then building the speed back up once more. About to start what he hoped will be a flying lap next time around. Just trying to give himself a bit of track space here, slowing down the end of the lap and staying out, getting on the throttle now and accelerating out through turns 15 and 16, which make up the Jackie X chicane, the Jackie X corner, and already up to 160, 170 kilometers an hour, nearly up to 200 and 215 max before he slows the car down, drops down to third gear and takes on turn 1 at Erst. Doesn't run too wide, doesn't pick up the curbs. Windscreen wipers on full chat now as he goes into the right-hander at turn 2, Steravacht Bocht. That leads almost directly, the tiny link straight into turn 3 with the windmills in the background through Canal Bocht. And then into the right-hander at turn 4, which is where we've seen a couple of cars going off the road here. Very narrow exit, short link straight then as you run up the parallel to the start-finish straight now on the other side of the paddock, and slow the cars down for the next chicane, the Kleiner chicane, turns 5 and 6, carrying plenty of speed on the exit to that, taking the curbs even though it's wet. Slight uphill climb then, and then it's downhill into this very quick left-hander through turn 7. And we've had a spin for the teammates of the driver you're just riding on board with, because that's Dev Gore losing the back end of his team Rosberg Audi. Nico Muller's teammate gets going again though, the American, and with no damage to the car, I'm sure, I'll be able to carry on. Very, very wet indeed out there. So Dev Gore with a quick, but I think harmless spin, be able to rejoin. He got the 10th fastest time in the dry conditions before the red flag came down. So Dev will be quite buoyed by that, certainly with a very good team. And the team have said he's making improvements all the time as he gets used to the championship of these types of car. He's a young driver, he's only 23, Dev Gore, from Oklahoma City in the USA. And it's, as I've said a couple of times in the past, he only started racing when he was 18. He's only been racing anything for 5 years. Latecomer to karts as well. There's Formula 1 podium finisher Alex Albon then in his Ferrari as we get a replay of Dev Gore just losing the back end of the car. He wasn't that far behind the Team Rosberg Audi of Nico Muller on track. Span, Vincent Abril had to take slightly evasive action. That was coming out of turn 1. There you saw Sheldon van der Linde coming out of the pit lane exit as Dev got out off the racing line, sensibly so, got the car to the inside and then regathered himself in time to get the car up and running again pretty shortly thereafter. Right, who's going quickly at the moment? Lucas Auer is the quickest driver on track at the moment with a 141.637. So obviously he's not going to shoot up the timing screen because these are wet times now, but he's the quickest driver on track, 141 for him. We've got a few drivers in the 142s, 142.7 for Daniel Ankadea. We've had a 142.7 for Timo Glock as well. A 143.6 for Christian Klein, so he's going fairly rapidly. To get the replay on board with Philip Ellis, who just got it wrong there going into the chicane and had to take very briefly to the gravel trap. See the nose of the Mercedes to shuck its head as it protested going into the corner too quickly. A little bit of aquaplaning, but Philip Ellis kept cool and got the car quickly back on track. You're right on board with him once again. Over the crest there with the balance of the car changes. All the way it goes onto the back of the car. And then over the crest you go, back downhill into the next section. Great track this. The drivers really, most of them enjoy racing here, enjoy the challenge that it throws. And it comes up to the end of the lap to give it another go. He's going to stay back out there, so it comes out of the final corner. And there is Philip in the blue and white number 57 Mercedes heading on to another lap. Right, I've had a 141.2 last time around for Arjun Maini, so the Indian driver, now the quickest driver on track, except for one, and that one is Sheldon van der Linde, who's the first driver in the wet to get under the 141s. 140.966 for Sheldon. So van der Linde, who'd already set the 5th best time in the dry, he's now the quickest driver in the wet. He was, because Lucas Auer has just done his best time in these conditions, a 139.229. It's actually his best time of the session because he didn't really do anything in the dry. So Lucas Auer, 139.229 for him. Esteban Moot didn't really get a lap in the dry either, so his best time of the whole session has actually come in wet conditions. They're 19th and 20th, but they're going quickly out here at the moment. So the first driver into the 139s is Lucas Auer, the Austrian driver, back with Mercedes after driving for BMW last season, but Mercedes is where He spent his previous time as DTM racer, as Nico Muller goes on a charge on this lap now as well. We'll see if this is going to be a quick one. As a quick lap again for Nico last time around at a 1:38.934. This could be potentially quicker, looking at the body language of the car. It's looking like a good lap. Aggressive, but not sliding around. Comes out of the last turn, heading for the line. Gets the car about 186 kilometers an hour as he crosses that line. And Nico Muller on that lap, slightly slower, 1:40.859. Still a good lap though, but a 1:39.229 last time around for Auer, the only driver to break the 1:40 so far. But you've got Muller, Rockenfeller going pretty quickly as well. Marco Wittmann's actually put a really good lap in, 1:40.1 last time around. And a 1:39 for Kelvin van der Linde as well, so he's into the 1:39s, but Lucas Auer's done a 1:37. 1:37.9 now for Luki, so the Austrian absolutely flying along here, much quicker than anybody else in these conditions. 1:37.9 for him. The next best laps are in the 1:39s, a couple of seconds slower. Ellis in the 1:39s now, 1:39.8 for him. Van der Linde with a 1:39.7. And most of the others, 1:40s, 1:41s and 1:42s. Nico Muller, his best so far in these conditions, a 1:42.5. So about 14 seconds a lap slower than we were in the dry conditions at the start of the session. As you ride back with Nico Muller. And this is the run through the chicane section at turns 8, 9 and 10. And there is Lucas Auer, quickest by a million miles in these wet conditions. So 1:37.9 last time around. His first sector time was not his best on this lap, so I think he might have backed off a little bit this time around, but he put two really quick lap times in. We've had a 1:38 from Marco Wittmann. That's the second best time so far. No, make that third best time. He does a 1:38.8, a 1:38.7 we've just had for Max Gotts in the Mercedes. So they're into the 1:38s, and a 1:38.052 for Nico Muller as he crossed the line. So he's now the second quickest driver out there. They're all getting into their 1:30s now, 1:38s for quite a few drivers as they get used to the conditions. And maybe it's just starting to dry out a little bit. It doesn't look like the rain's really coming down anymore. There's still plenty of surface water off the line. But you can see that line is starting to get less wet now. It's not a drying line quite yet, but it's certainly been mopped up here by the cars that are out there in force, getting their laps in here, which might be useful info for the setup and useful info for the drivers going into the weekend. So we've got 12.5 minutes left to go in this second free practice session here at Zolder. We've had a 1:37 as the best lap so far in these conditions from Lucas Auer. He has backed off now. Last lap was a 1:43. He had backed off because he's just got going again. And Lucas has just done an not an absolute best, but an absolute best in these conditions in the first sector. So 31.156 seconds. That's actually his personal best as well because of his lack of running in the dry at the start of the session. Back on board with Nico Muller, who's been the second quickest driver so far with a 1:38.052. It hasn't quite got into the 1:37s yet. To the 1:38s as well for Vincent Abril, the bright yellow Team HRT run Mercedes. Marco Wittmann going past Esteban Moot. Esteban, you ride on board with now in the T3 Motorsports Lamborghini. Team enjoying its home race last time out at Lausitzring, based in that part of the world. And on board now with the 19-year-old as he tries to get into the 1:30s if he can. Lucas Auer, pretty good second sector time. Not sure it's going to be in the 1:37s again. 1:37.967, the best wet time that we've seen so far. Hungerdale is still in the pits. Rockenfeller is in the pits. Van der Linde, Sheldon van der Linde, Timo Glock, Vincent Abril and Christian Klein in the pits, but everybody else on track. So it's pretty busy out there still, flinging the Lamborghini over the curbs here. Huracan GT3 is Esteban Moot. 1:37.632 now for Lucas Auer. So that was his best lap, the best lap in these conditions so far. So a 1:37.6 and a 1:37.9. Nobody else has got into the 1:37s yet, although Nico Muller is getting close. His last lap was a 1:38.013. So Nico Muller enjoying the wet conditions. He's a smooth driver, Nico, and that always helps in these conditions where you have to be getting the power down more gradually. You have to be on the brakes more gradually. You can't snatch the brakes and lock up. You're going to skid on straight. You have to plan your corner entry as well, because when you turn the steering wheel, it won't react as quickly as it does in the dry. With the slippy conditions, you turn in well before you want the car to bite. You have to wait for a second or so, and then it will dig in, the tyres will turn. And you've got to pick your lines as well, because quite often off the normal racing line is a bit grippier. Rubber has been laid down by the slick tyres. That dead rubber gets wet, gets slippy, and sometimes off the racing line on the outside of corners there's far more grip in the wet conditions. So these experimenting with the lines is something else these drivers are going to be doing. See lots of puddles on the inside there on the run up to the start-finish straight, but there's definitely a drier line now forming. But you go off the line, which you have to do to get past another car. It's still pretty treacherous, still very wet coming out of turn 1 into turn 2, as you can see from Lucas Auer here, who did another 1:37 last time around. His second best lap it was, 1:37.8. We have got a 1:38.279 for Nico Müller with 2 good laps as well. Still hasn't quite broken into the 1:37s. We had a 1:38.4 from Marco Wittmann. He is the 3rd quickest driver now in the wet. So Auer the fastest in these conditions, followed by Müller, and a couple of tenths back, Marco Wittmann. So that's 3 different brands represented in the top 3 in the wet conditions. Mercedes with Auer, Audi with Müller, and BMW with Wittmann. Here is Lucas then, on his way through. One of the drivers that does have a bit of knowledge about this circuit, Lucas Auer. Got on the podium here last year. It's his only podium at Zolder. 3rd place finish in the 2020 season. Lights now ablaze for Lukey, the nephew of ex-Grand Prix racer and multiple Grand Prix winner Gerhard Berger is now the chairman of ITR, who run the DTM. And the sun you can see now coming out, which will be making life a bit tricky in another sense now, because you're going to get all the sun glaring off the very wet surface. And that could be tricky for these drivers. I'm not sure how much it's going to dry out in 8 minutes. That'll be another important thing for the engineers to look at, though, as Auer comes into the pits. How quickly does it dry? At which point do slick tyres start to work better than wet tyres? Given what we've seen so far, I think it might dry out fairly quickly. It's a bit of a breeze there today as well. It's fairly warm, 21 degrees. Track temperature now, as you can imagine, much cooler than it was when it was dry. It was 26.5 degrees. It's now 21.7, the track temperature. So it's not about 5 degrees off the track temperature. But the air temperature and the breeze still there to dry the track out, and lots of cars to mop up the surface water as well. As you see, 2013 champion Mike Rockenfeller coming into shop, set the 3rd quickest time in the dry conditions, and he's on an out lap at the moment. Another 1:38 for Nico Müller, who's doing a pretty long run. Daniel Hunkedaer is that. No, it's Max Gotz, the other pink Mercedes, unrelated in that it's from a different team. Same backer, same sponsor, BVT, but Hunkedaer racing for Gruppe M, and HRT is the team that run Max Gotz. So he's just staying out of the way as he gets his car up to speed. Hunkedaer is still in the pits, so whether he'll get out or not now, I'm not sure. After the damage to the back end of the car, maybe it was a bit more substantial than it first looked. Might be something underneath that I need to check out. So Hunkedaer, for now, having done no wet running, which could be a disadvantage as well. Well, not much. He did a lap in the damp and went off. So in the pits, we've got Hunkedaer, Wittmann, Max Buch, Liam Lawson, Alex Albon, Timo Glock, Christian Kleen, Lucas Auer, Philip Ellis, and Esteban Moot. Timo Glock in the sunshine now, but with a wet road, about to head back out onto the circuit. One of the drivers that went off in the first free practice session this morning. And Timo had a pretty good record here last year. He had 4 races on this circuit in back-to-back weekends, and he had 3 4th-place finishes. It was his best circuit of the year. So no reason he shouldn't be up there this year, although it's been a tricky start to the season for Timo in the Rover Racing BMW. A car which has gone well in the hands of Sheldon van der Linde so far this season. Timo hasn't quite got it working as he would have liked. He faded away in the second half of both races at the Lausitz Ring once he'd made his tyre stop and tyre change. There's Marco Wittmann. Looks like he's heading back out anytime soon. The Vulcan Horse Motorsport squad running him this season. And another driver with plenty of experience, but a new team to get used to and a new type of car to get used to as well. There's Vincent Abril going out with HRT. Hubert Haupt, team boss, who's going to be getting back into DTM himself, a third car for that team. Still a regular racer, but he'll become, when he comes back into the series, the first driver to race in all 3 eras of DTM. Now in his early 50s, but still a regular racer on pole. The team at the Nürburgring 24-hour race, when they were running Maro Engel, Patrick Assenheimer and Nico Bastian this year. So a great GT experience, and Hubert Haupt's been doing some 24-hour races himself over the last couple of seasons with the team. So I'm interested to see how he gets on. There is Vincent Abril then, still to score a point in DTM. We thought he got 3 points for pole and 18 points for finishing second in the very first race at Monza. But there was a fuel irregularity with the team and with the car, and the points we found out when we were at Lausitzring a couple of weeks ago, subsequently after an investigation, taken away from him. So he lost the pole position, he lost all the points. As we see Alex Albon in the pits now, the AF Corsa squad. Almata Ferrari runs the team, and another hugely experienced and hugely successful international GT team coming into DTM for the first time. Great to see Ferrari in the DTM for the first time as well. Ferrari winning that first race at Monza, which was the first time since the 1990s that a non-German manufacturer had won in the DTM, Alfa Romeo having previously had that honour. So that's on Abril out. He's getting up to speed. We've had Nico Muller staying out. He's done the longest stint, I think, and he's very consistent. And 138.2s, 138.1s, 138.3s all the way through his stint. Lucas Auer's gone back out. Just had Mike Rockenfeller 139.2. Muller does another good lap, 138.5. Who else is going quickly? Miney, 138.7. Kelvin van der Linde, 138.7 as well. Not much between those two.
2 laps to go. 2 laps to go.
So a couple of laps remaining in the session. Lucas Auer is told he's going to push on again. See if he can get into the 137s again. He can, 137.801. So he's done a 137.6, he's done a couple of 137.8s and a 137.9 as well. He'll be doing a rain dance tomorrow and Sunday because he is by far the quickest driver in these conditions. Only Muller has got anywhere near him really with low 138s, but even then he's been 3 or 4 tenths quicker than last year's championship runner-up. Got 139s for a couple of drivers, but there's only Muller in the 138s and there's only Auer in the 137s. Some of them still getting back up to speed though. Now we've got a 138.3 for Max Buch last time around, so that's the third best that we've seen. So Max Buch enjoying the conditions. The lap times ought to get quicker now because that surface water has disappeared, although sometimes a less wet track, a greasy track, can actually be a bit slower than a fully wet track because the tyres aren't able to work properly, and you sometimes get things like gravel and mud and grass dragged back onto the circuit if drivers run wide, and that's not washed away when the rain starts to stop falling. So it can be actually, ironically, a bit slower when it's a bit drier at one point. But we'll see what Lukey can do when he goes for perhaps on the next lap. Down to the final minute and a half of the session though. And yeah, times are starting to creep down. More and more drivers in the 138s and 139s now. Nico Muller's just done a slow lap, 1 minute 51. So whether that was just backing off or whether he's had a moment, not sure. But that was a slow lap from Nico last time around. Rockenfeller 139.5. Looking at Arjun Miney going through now, and Arjun's on a slow lap last time around, but might get one more quick lap in if he hurries with a minute left on the clock now. 1:37.354 for Vincent Abril. So he is now the fastest in these conditions. So Vincent Abril, who we were watching a couple of laps ago, the bright yellow Mercedes, the Monegasque driver, has gone fastest of all in the wet conditions, even quicker than Lucas Auer, whose best are 1:37.6. So 1:37.3 now for Vincent. That's really encouraging for him. But a 1:38.2 for Marco Wittmann last time around. That was a good lap. And also the 1:37s now is, it's Abril again, 1:37.9, so he's done 2 in the 1:37s. So Vincent Abril, quickest man on track at the moment, and about 2 or 3 tenths quicker than Lucas Auer, who's not going quickly at the moment. Did a 1:48 last time around, into the final 11 seconds of the session. Wittmann's going to get one more lap in. He crosses the line, but the next one through is going to take the flag. So we see if Marco Wittmann can push on. Anybody else, as the flag comes out, flying along at the moment in these conditions? Not really. There's Max Gotts. Haven't seen too much from him in terms of very quick lap times, comparatively very quick lap times in the damp and the wet. He's on the attack here, though. He's not that far behind the driver second in the championship, Liam Lawson. Muller's taken the flag, and he responded with one more quick lap at the end, or quickish, 1:39.8. Wasn't his best, but it wasn't too bad. We've had a flag for Esme Hawkey, Arjun Maini, Sophia Florsch, Lucas Auer, Esteban Moot. They've all taken the flag so far. And into the pits comes Max Gotts, so he's not going to get a flying lap in either. There's a spin there for number 3, Kelvin van der Linde. Quickly recovers, but that will ruin his chances of improving. Been one of the quicker drivers at times, though, in the wet conditions. Kelvin, the championship leader, rejoining just in front of Philip Ellis. Second car on his shot, coming in just a little bit too hot, I think. Back end swapped around, just kissed the gravel trap, onto the curbs, over the curbs, and almost a full 360. But crucially kept the engine running. And that balked then Philip Ellis, and Marco Wittmann had to stand on the brakes as well, so that probably ruined his chances of a quick final lap of the session. I think he's probably bailed and headed for the pits now. Kelvin van der Linde and Philip Ellis will both take the checkered flag, but there's not going to be any late improvements there. So Vincent Abril, very impressive indeed, with a 1:37.3 in those conditions, the quickest driver, but the one that set the most 1:37 lap times was Lucas Auer. Best was 1:37.6, but he did 4 or 5 sub 1:38 second laps. Nico Muller also with a good session, that in terms of a long run and a lot of consistent lap times. Practice tyre change for the team at Valkenhorst on Marco Wittmann's BMW to round out the session. Daniel Ungedown never did get back out there, so he only did 8 laps in that session. Didn't do a great deal of running in session 1 either. So Daniel Ungedown will round out that session, although there was only about 20 minutes of dry running in that one, but he'll round out the session and the day with the quickest time, 1:28.112 seconds, only 35 thousandths of a second quicker than Nico Muller. Mike Rockenfeller, 1:28.3 in third. Marco Wittmann fourth with a 1:28.7. 1:28.7s as well for Sheldon van der Linde in fifth, Max Buch in sixth, we had Liam Lawson seventh, Max Gotts eighth, Alex Albon in ninth, and Dev Gore rounding out the top 10. Timo Glock 11th, Abril 12th, Hawkey 13th, Maini 14th, and Kelvin van der Linde down in 15th place. So mixed conditions here, a tricky day for the drivers and teams at Zolder, and the weather might play its part tomorrow. We'll find out with the first race day here at Zolder, qualifying and race 1 coming up tomorrow. From me, Chris Hartley, and the team, thanks for watching Free Practice. Bye for now.